think it was very difficult last year, but it was pretty evident that it wasn't exactly how I wanted and how I visioned our team playing, how the development of the players was being done within the club, within the facility.
First time in more than 2 months, Inter Miami spoke with us and answered some of the questions about the direction of the program. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest edition of Miami Total Football Radio, or as I like to say in Spanish, Miami Total Football Radio. I'm Franco Panizo and I'm your co-host on this week's podcast, and with me as always and once again is David Beckham's long lost cousin Steve Brenner. Steve, how are you doing, man? How was your weekend, and how did you take the first opportunity to talk to Inter Miami in quite a while?
All good. It was. I thought it was really interesting. You know, obviously we have to put it in context because of all the situation. You know, the COVID situation. We're not actually physically going to the press conference, so it definitely has a different feel to it. It's not ideal doing it over Zoom. Normally we'd been down at the stadium and there'd be, we'd speak to them off the side of the stage, and we'd, start getting much more rapport with the people in charge, and just be easy. We were restricted to one question each, so it's difficult. But saying that, I still think that, I thought they spoke well. We weren't able to really get into the guts of everything that went on last season, but it looked like they were basically just ready to sort of brush whatever happened last season under the carpet and just start again. They're rebooting, they're having a fresh start. And, I thought they both, Phil Neville, David Beckham and Jorge Mas all came across pretty well and spoke well about, and Chris Henderson, the new sporting director, just talking about their vision for the future. So it felt like a fresh start.
Steve, you said we were all limited to one question, but I feel like everybody, myself included, asked two whenever we were called upon. So we definitely skirted the rules there a little bit. At least most of us did. And there is plenty to chew on based on what they all said. And we're going to dissect it all. We're going to touch on it all. I told you on last week's pod that I think we're going to debate a little bit more this season, and I think it's going to start probably today. We're probably going to duke it out at some point, and have to wrap on the strap on the boxing gloves and go at it at Inter Miami's stadium. But this could be the start of it all, because I think we're going to have very different viewpoints on a lot of different things beginning maybe today. So before we get into all of that, just as a reminder to everyone to give us a follow on all our social media accounts at Miami Total Football on YouTube and Facebook, and at MIA Total Football on Twitter and Instagram. Also, please, if you can, give us some feedback, a comment, or a review on Apple Podcast, formerly known as iTunes, and that helps us obviously get to a larger audience and helps us grow and be able to bring you more of this type of content on a regular basis. But with all that said, Steve, let's get to it. Steve, as we said, we finally were able to talk to not only the new head coach Phil Neville and sporting director Chris Henderson, but we were able to speak to co-owners David Beckham and Jorge Mas, and they shed some light on a lot of things, not only about the direction of the franchise going forward after these appointments, but they also kind of left a little bit of crumbs as to what happened in 2020 that resulted in these decisions being made. Now, they didn't necessarily say directly, hey, this is where Diego Alonso fell short, nor did they say, hey, this is where Paul McDonough fell short, but they definitely left you with a little bit of something, which I think this is why let's do something a little different on this pod. Let's listen to some of the quotes, or some of the more notable quotes from the press conference, and then just kind of share what we think about what's being said. So let's start with this one from Jorge Mas on what caused the changes. Let's start there so that we can then move forward into, what's to come with Neville and Henderson. So here's Jorge Mas on what caused the changes this offseason.
Last season, and the decisions that we've made about bringing on board Chris Henderson and Phil Neville, don't necessarily have to do with just wins and losses or the points that we accumulated during 2020. For us, as we alluded to earlier, it goes beyond that. It goes to what happens in non-game days. It goes to building a culture here that goes into how do we make players better here. And it goes from aspects of sports performance, medical, training, nutrition, education, so many factors and facets that go into excelling on the field. And we think that in bringing in new leadership that can help us excel in all of the areas, that will make us a better club and a better team. And again, establish a DNA and culture that's a reflection of ownership's aspirations. And we felt that bringing Chris and Phil at this time were the leaders that we needed for the following chapters of Inter Miami in 21 and beyond.
Steve, after listening to that again, and maybe even when you heard it on Friday, but what are your takeaways listening to that quote from Jorge Mas?
Yeah, I think reading between the lines, it's very critical, really, of that previous regime, which was headed up from the start by Paul McDonough. I mean, if you go back a year and we think about what we were talking about this time, sort of around last year, they hadn't got any players, they hadn't appointed a manager. Diego Alonso had been appointed this by then, but you get my drift. It was a rush, wasn't it? The stadium was being built, everything was going on. It'd just be a relief once they kick off, and get 11 players on the pitch. But then in retrospect, you look at what happened, and Paul McDonough was pretty much in charge from the get-go. And that was his job, obviously, to direct things and get players in and create squads and do everything and set up a front office and framework within the coaching setup to establish them as an elite team for what they wanted to be. And clearly, when Jorge Mas is saying it goes from aspects of sports performance, medical training, nutrition, education, they felt that we won't settle for mediocrity. I think is pretty damning of the job that he felt that Paul McDonough had done. And then Diego Alonso then came on. We were talking off air, weren't we? Nearly a whole team, like 12 players, I think, that was signed by Paul McDonough and or Diego Alonso have now left the club. So it wasn't working maybe on a number of levels. And the fact they've made these changes, just that it's as clear as day. They clearly weren't happy.
Yeah, at least a dozen players have left since last season, obviously, and it tends to happen maybe not when you're a little more successful as an expansion team, but there is some turnover with expansion teams because it's the start of a new project. But at least 12 players moving on in the first season is not necessarily a positive sign. And I agree with you that I think it's, again, there's no names being put to this directly by Jorge Mas, but, it's very clear that they were unhappy with the job that Diego Alonso and Paul McDonough put forth. And I agree with you, especially when he says, the aspects of sports performance, medical, training, nutrition, education, a lot of that stuff falls under Paul McDonough's umbrella, right? So that goes beyond coaching. But there were other points where coaching was brought up, and something we'll touch on a little bit later, because they also touched on player development. And, they've referred to the academy and bringing players up from there, which I think was one of the overarching themes of this press conference. But they also referred to it with the first team, and that clearly falls on Diego Alonso, Julian Carranza, Matias Pellegrini, the club's first two signings. Neither one of them had an exceptional season. Both of them were pretty poor. I remember when we did our grades, I think they were both in the D range, or maybe you gave one of them a C or a C minus, but it wasn't a very impressive showing from them. And there were a lot of players that you kind of felt, punched below their weight or their expectations. I think Chris Henderson later on, when it was his turn to speak with Phil Neville, said, to be successful in MLS with the salary cap, you need players that outperform their contracts. And Inter Miami, in my opinion, had far too many players that underperformed their contracts. We don't know what they were getting paid, but just the level of performance wasn't up to par. So clearly, not Mas and Beckham were not happy with the overall job that was done.
But you can understand that, can't you? You can understand they're not happy. The COVID situation obviously didn't help. It made things much harder to, the transfer market to navigate. The season was stopped, all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line, Beckham sat in the UK watching at home, wouldn't have been happy with what he's watching. And Norway's Jorge Mas, we used to watch him, didn't we, in the stands, going crazy, really living every moment. And he wasn't happy because the team on the whole weren't playing well at all, were they? It was terrible. So, it's understandable.
Yeah, like you said, when he says we won't settle for mediocrity as owners, I mean, that right there is a pretty sharp dagger being thrown.
They don't want to be a team with seven wins, trying to scrape into the playoff in the last day in the middle of a tropical rainstorm. They don't want. They want to be home and dry and ready just to concentrate on the playoffs without having to go through all that. So that it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough.
Yeah, the ambitions have remained high. They even in this press conference, different people spoke at different times, and the ambition that the club has remains. The faces might have changed a little bit in terms of the leadership, but the ambitions remain for what they think they can become, and that's a global club that's one of the biggest in the world. So and he says that Jorge Mas says that when he says we think, as soon as he says the mediocrity, he follows that up with saying we think that in bringing in new leadership that can help us excel, that will make us a better club. So clearly the year one was not only not good enough, it was really poor. It was really poor, and that's what's led to the change. Because you could have maybe a disappointing season, and say, all right, we have to build on something. But I think that they didn't even see enough promising starting points to say let's continue with this, and that's why. That's why they're saying, or more or less, our interpretation of what they're saying led to the changes.
And you could start your eye rolling now, but when you look at Beckham, he was at Man United. That period they won everything. Then he went to Real Madrid. He's captain England, played at World Cups. He kind of knows the standard isn't. What he knows exactly what he wants and what he aspire to. It's difficult to get to the level he probably wants, but certainly what was on show wasn't good enough, and that's it.
Well, let's go to that part about the player development, because Jorge Mas again spoke about the issues of 2020. This was a shorter quote, but I think it's notable, so let's give it a listen.
I speak on behalf of David and us at the player development side of what happened in 2020. Was not to David's satisfaction or ownership satisfaction, especially with some of the young talent on the team. So all of the decisions that we've made are all driven by developing players, about when someone steps foot in Inter Miami as a club, they become a better player and a better person. And we feel that change in leadership was necessary in order to emphasize the things that we as ownership want to emphasize.
So Steve, what do you take away from that? Again, I think it goes back to the point I made a little bit earlier ago about the likes of Pellegrini and Carranza and the younger players not showing enough. And again, not every young player is going to come in and kill it right off the bat, right? They might have highs and lows, but there were the lows far outweighed the highs. I mean, Carranza had the one good game against Orlando City where he scored 2 goals, but then I don't think he had another notable game. If I'm remembering correctly, he didn't score again the rest of the season. Pellegrini had 1 goal, and by and large was a non-factor for Inter Miami.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're not happy with it. I mean, someone like Lewis Morgan, you could say, improved under Diego Alonso's coaching and under his managerial wing. He got better and better, but we're not entirely sure what's been happening with the youth setups, what's sort of happening just below the first team, who's coming through, who's looking good, and other players, like you say, the ones you mentioned, just didn't improve or just didn't kick on. Someone like Pellegrini is so young, living in a foreign country for the first time. It was very difficult for him, but there just wasn't enough. So they needed 2 or 3 sort of Lewis Morgans to really sort of show it. And it was only really Lewis Morgan that kind of looked anything like a sort of promising prospect, even though he's 24. It just wasn't happening on a number of levels.
So I had heard something last year about one of the more promising prospects in the academy leaving. And I never heard why, but the fact that one of your more promising prospects leaves your academy is not necessarily a good sign. So maybe that's something that that they referenced or that they were talking about when, especially when Beckham at one point, and we're not going to get to this quote because we can't get to the whole press conference, otherwise we'll be here for 2 hours. But there was one moment where he says, "We don't want people leaving the club without, we don't want people leaving the club with essentially with a bad flavor in their mouth. We want when people leave this club to say things like if they had been here for 10, 15, 20 years. He was just essentially saying that he wants them to leave on a positive note. Now, I don't know if he was referencing this exact situation that I'm telling you that I heard last year, but maybe, because it sounded very similar to that situation that I heard of in 2020. But
as we've alluded to in the past, the setup behind the scenes was, there was some questionable stuff going on that didn't go down well with a number of people, and people that found it just a bit difficult to fathom what was happening, etc., etc. So there were problems with the setup, and that must have just seeped into different areas of the club, as it does. So this fresh start they're going to have, fresh sporting director, fresh coach. Maybe that will just refresh things, and they can have a look at it again.
Well, speaking of head coach is Phil Neville now. And we had a good, healthy debate last week about his qualifications. Those questions came up during this press conference, but so did his relationship with David Beckham. And David Beckham and Jorge Mas and Phil Neville himself acknowledged that they are friends. They acknowledge that they go way back, not just as teammates, but also as friends. So we're going to tap into that and dive into that, but let's hear both David Beckham and Jorge Mas on Beckham's relationship with Phil Neville.
Of course, people are always going to turn around and say, oh, it's because he's your friend. It's nothing to do with him being my friend. I'm an owner of a club with Jorge. Our ownership group don't just employ our friends. We employ the best people, whether it's on the field, off the field, in our backroom staff, the staff that we have working at our training facility, at the stadium. We are running a serious soccer club here, and I think at the end of the day, we hire people that we feel are best suited for the job. And my loyalty to Phil has always been there, because as a player, I relied on him to keep making those runs by the side of me. I never gave him the ball because I thought I was a better crosser of the ball than he was, so he never got those balls. But I knew that he would keep on making those runs because he knew that was what was best for the team. And he would make those decisions as a coach, not just of our club, but a coach of our academy system, of a coach of our USL team, and as a leader. That's why he's in this position. Nothing to do with the relationship that we have, the friendship that we have, the loyalty that we have to each other. He's the right man for the job.
I'd like to interject something, and I'll say it in maybe more direct terms than David can. Phil Neville was not handed the Inter Miami job. Phil Neville earned the job. There was a very thorough interview process with multiple candidates. As you may imagine, the Inter Miami head coaching position is an extremely attractive position. There were inquiries and interests from coaches from all over the globe. We and David as well conducted multiple interviews for the head coaching job with a myriad of candidates with different backgrounds. So, Phil earned it. Phil is the right man for the job at this time. So, the fact that he's David's friend is a reality, and no one runs from that. Actually, we embrace it, but he wasn't given or handed the job because he's friends with David Beckham or solely because of his relationship with David Beckham.
Okay, Steve, I want you, and we don't have to harp on it too long because I know we did it last week, but I want you to defend Phil Neville. Listen, I'm gonna give you some leeway here because I have two step cousins that are English. They were born in England. I think they have some Peruvian ancestry in there. They're step cousins. They listen to the podcast. Niall, Austin, what's up, guys? Thanks for listening. But they both messaged me after they heard the pod last week, and they were both like, they both essentially had very similar takes to what you said, and they were like, "Oh, you got to give him a fair chance. He comes from Manchester United, and the great team of Manchester United." So you're not alone, but I want you to back up Phil Neville here.
I never thought I was alone, and it's obviously great that members of your family have probably got maybe some more soccer intelligence than you have. I mean, it's wonderful, great to know. Look, the thing is that with I grew up with their, I'm relatively the same age as Neville and Beckham, give or take a couple of years. So I sort of witnessed them coming through that great team with Man United. And at the time, living in England, they were just the team. Beckham was one of the stars. Phil Neville was a good solid pro, good squad player. And so I see the story, their progress from players to suddenly to being here in Miami. I just think it's a great story, and with my English journalist hat on, it's obviously a great story for about two English stalwarts of the game that have been around for the last sort of 25 years. So, but you can't discount, and I know again eye rolling, I can see it now, even though we're speaking over Skype and he hasn't got he has had coaching experience. He's never had a head coach's job, so to speak, not in the men's game. Obviously, has with the women. Which I did think Beckham made a decent argument when he said that managing a women's national team in some ways is quite similar in MLS. To the parallels with MLS are there in terms of he hasn't got a lot of negotiation in terms of ways to try and bring in players. You've got to try and develop players and coach players and really deal with what you've got rather than like being in the Premier League and spending millions on a brand new squad. You can't do that in MLS. And he threw himself into a new situation, an uncomfortable situation for him initially. And overall, he did a decent job. He got to the World Cup semi-final. They won the She Believes Cup here. I know it doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but he definitely improved that team. And you can't discount his football upbringing and what he came from, and playing with under Sir Alex Ferguson, playing with Beckham and Keane and Scholes and Giggs, and playing in the Champions League, all that kind of stuff. He's done all his coaching badges. You've got to start somewhere. And I think he's not just finished his career, put his kit away and just rocked up to Miami and said, "Oh, hello, here I am." He's done the hard yards. This is his chance. This is his opportunity. I'm not saying he's going to win MLS Cup in the first season, but I think they did put their argument across that, yeah, look, okay, he hasn't been a head coach before, but this is the kind of caliber of players and clubs and systems and managers that he's played under in the past, as Beckham has, and that will rub off. Just like when they're trying to sort the front office out. They both were at Man United during one of the most successful eras ever in soccer, certainly in the UK, under one of the greatest managers of all time. So, that can't have not rubbed off. And to be fair, it's not to say that anyone that played under Sir Alex Ferguson during that time at Man United is all of a sudden becoming like the new Jose Mourinho. I mean, it's a bit of a rogues gallery. Steve Bruce, Mark Hughes, Roy Keane. I was covered at Sunderland. I can't say he was an amazing manager. Giggs.
You beat me to a jab that I was just about to hit you with regards to the qualifications. Look, I'll agree with you that I nodded my head and thought it was a good point, and when he compared the structure of England's women's national team to the structure of a fairly new franchise in MLS and having to try to build something that needs a lot of building. So I agree that's a good point. I agree that's a good point.
Beckham knows how MLS works, obviously, having been at the LA Galaxy for 6-7 years. So he also knows how it works. But anyway, carry on.
No, I mean, I agree that that's a good point, and maybe something that not everyone, including myself, had not taken into consideration, and it's a point for Phil Neville's appointment. But I can't agree. I can't sit here and agree with neither David Beckham nor Jorge Mas when they say things like Phil Neville was not handed the Inter Miami job, Phil Neville earned the job. Or when they say it has nothing to do with him being my friend. I don't agree with either one of that. Exactly. So hold on. Let's rewind. Let's rewind. Normally, who hires? Normally, right? In a regular setup, who hires the head coach?
The ownership or the front office, whatever.
A sporting director normally hires the head coach, which is not the case.
They all speak. It's not. I mean, they all speak together, but yeah, I mean, it's a collective. It's a collective, isn't it? Especially if you've got football people in the front office. Jorge Mas isn't going to be throwing his weight around.
Correct.
Talking about coaches, but Beckham is.
But I'm saying there's not many clubs around the world where you're like, this big soccer savvy experienced player is part of the ownership group and has a very hands-on role. This is unique. But normally the sporting director hires the head coach. I just don't see it. I don't see how, if you had given Chris Henderson a blank slate, you had hired Chris Henderson a month ago, how he would have come up with Phil Neville as the choice,
because he didn't know, did he?
Correct. So that's a David Beckham decision. So how does he get to Phil Neville as the choice? It's certainly not on qualification, certainly not on resume. It's on his knowledge of him as a person and as a teammate and as a friend. So I can't sit here and say, well, when he says it has nothing to do with him being my friend, that I can nod my head in agreement with that, because that's not true. That's not true. He absolutely, their friendship absolutely has something to do with this hiring. I mean, in my opinion, that's just my opinion.
He is his friend, and he knows him because he's his friend. But he thinks that he would do a decent job here, and that is why he's given him the job. It's not because they're friends. It's because he thinks.
I don't doubt that he thinks that Phil Neville can do a good job. I fully believe that, but I also believe that their friendship is what's gotten Phil Neville to this point to have this opportunity, because this is a very ambitious club. And again, last week when we talked about Chris Henderson, we both raved about his credentials, his qualifications, his resume. We can't do that for Phil Neville. You can't. I don't think I definitely can't do that, and I don't think you could either. You just can't point to his resume and say, look what he's done here, and here. No, wow, this is a great hiring. Now, maybe it'll end up working out. Maybe.
I hope so.
But based on what he's done, there's no consistency in terms of the hirings that they've made here, because Chris Henderson is a proven guy who's had a lot of success. And that's why,
qualified.
It's pretty unanimous, or I think general consensus is that he's a home run hire. Whereas Phil Neville there's some people that think he's going to do well. There's some people that are a little bit more skeptical, and some people think he's going to do really poorly. So the jury he'll decide how, what perception is by the job he does, and for his sake and for the team's sake, hopefully he does well, but he definitely is not this home run candidate that they made him seem. Because, Jorge Mas says we had a lot of interest from a lot of candidates because this is a position that has a lot of interest, as you can imagine. So how is Phil Neville the chosen one out of all these people that apparently showed interest for this position? How? Like what? Because it's not off his resume. It's definitely not off his resume.
No, it's not. But I mean, Beckham has clearly got this vision for the club that he wants it to be. I did the story in the UK papers. Phil Neville wants to turn, Miami into Manchester. Yeah, it's a bit of hyperbole, but that is the standard that he wants to set. He knows that he wants to set the bar very, very high, using the way a club was built and squads were fostered and relationships, everything like that. He wants it carried out in the same way like he did when he was a player at Man United. And Phil Neville was there alongside him at that point. That's not just saying, just because he's done that, it's a.
But he knows that because they were teammates and friends. That's how he has that insight into how Phil Neville operates as a person or as a player, as a worker.
They came through the same system. Now he wants to replicate that.
So then it's his friend. So the friendship has to do something with that.
Of course, they're friends. I mean, they're not going to say we're not friends. He said they're family friends. He's known him 25 years, and you can't get away from that. But you also can't get away from the fact that, yes, okay, it's Phil Neville's first proper job, certainly in the men's game, having been, coaching a national team, a women's team for the last 3 years. His friendship with Beckham has helped. If he wasn't friends with Beckham, would he get the chance? I don't know. But the fact that they played together and they've been through those same experiences gives him, the idea that it can work if they both working at it together to make Inter Miami into the club that they wanted to make to happen. Would it be happen if Gallardo came from River Plate? Would they be able to do it in the same way? Would he be able to trust a Patrick Vieira or someone like that to try and make his vision realised? I don't know. But he's clearly got a great relationship with him and he trusts him. So that's the thing.
How did you get on this? How did we establish this relationship where you became the podcast mate and in lieu of Eric Krakauer? How did that happen? Do you remember how that happened?
Because I knew you.
Because you knew me, and
but also you knew I was the best man for the job.
But were we friends? Had we at any point hung out and grabbed beers or anything of the like?
I mean, not really, but
right.
I mean, we've had beers before. I didn't really know you then, but
I called you upon to the Miami Total Football brass because I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. And now I'm starting to second guess myself on that. But no, look, hey, let's see how it plays out. I think Inter Miami should improve under him because I think that with Chris Henderson on board and the like, and given how bad they were in 2020, I don't think that there's much more room, or there's not much room to be worse. I think that they will improve. Can't imagine Gonzalo Higuain has another season where he only puts one ball into the back of the net. So I think Inter Miami should improve in 2021, but let's see if he can take them to the levels that they want. Now, speaking of his experience, I asked him about it, and this is what Phil Neville had to say about that.
Afternoon. I think it's pretty simple. I think when people throw about the lack of experience, I always throw back that actually I've got a lot of experience of being around winners, a lot of experience about winning myself as a player, but actually coaching at the very top level in Spain, with Valencia, at Manchester United, and with the England national team getting to a World Cup semi-finals.
Steve, we just had a long back and forth about it, so we don't have to dive into this quote, that much, but anything there that you want to point to as for why you think, again, Phil Neville is the right guy?
Yeah, no, he makes a point here about Valencia, that he coached at Man United, and also, he coached the England women's national team. And he got to the World Cup semi-final. Yeah, great. The team didn't really progress as they wanted, but they did move forward, certainly in other aspects. Certainly getting to the semi-final was a great achievement. And it was the same conversations when he got the job 3 years ago, that he didn't have the requisite experience to carry off the role, and he did a decent job there. So, and this is his first opportunity as a head coach. So he's not just a fresh-faced rookie with no experience of what it's like to work inside some of the biggest football clubs and organisations in the world. He's had that experience. A library of experience, I think you called it. A library of experience. I want to ask you this, because you would know this better than I would. What is the general feeling about his time with England's women's national team? Because I'm just asking this because just yesterday, Saturday, I got an email from The Athletic, the outlet, with an article, and I think it's just happened to be timely, and I think it's a coincidence in terms of how it happened. I'm sure, the news hook obviously is part of it, but it was this email came in with this headline, or this title, subject. And it was obviously an email sent out to subscribers to be like, hey, come read this piece. But this is what The Athletic Weekly sent on Saturday. England are no better than when Phil Neville arrived. That's a damning legacy. So, I'm not as familiar with how he did with the England women's national team. So I'm asking you, Steve, how is the perception, or how do people view his job in his time there? Yeah, no, the gist of certainly the people that cover the women's national team sort of regularly was that they kind of stalled a bit under him. They had this great high where they got to the semi-final of the World Cup. The whole country was behind them. Women's football is not as big in the UK as it is in the US. It's growing and it's getting bigger. And I definitely think with him being like a sort of higher profile manager, that definitely got a lot more eyeballs on women's soccer and raised their profile, which is, obviously doesn't necessarily translate to success on the pitch, but that was one of the reasons why they wanted him to come in, and also to give him that winning feeling. It's funny, I covered his first press conferences when he took over the women's job, because his first matches were actually here in the US, part of the She Believes Cup, nearly 3 years ago now. So, and he was talking about, bringing the winning mentality, the same sort of stuff he was saying the other day. But it kind of stalled after the World Cup. They went on a bit of a lull, and then COVID hit, and then they didn't play, and then he was hanging around waiting for other jobs. And I think some of them felt that he should have quit. They had a new the former Netherlands coach Weigman coming in this September. So it went a little bit sour, but on the whole, I think he did a decent job. The critics would say that they slumped badly after the World Cup, and then he kind of went in a bit of free fall, and he didn't look that interested, or they didn't kick on as they wanted to. But on the whole, he did a decent enough job given the circumstances, especially in the final year. So look, didn't set the world alight, but definitely made progress and raised the profile with the way he operated, not just on the pitch, but just off the pitch with players and his man management and all that kind of stuff. So he will come out of that a better coach and a more experienced coach for sure, because World Cup semi-final that was a huge event, and he's used to big games, but that was massive. That was a massive thing, and he's got that experience in the bank. That whole run was quite dramatic at times. So he comes off the back of that, and I think you could only benefit from that, having those experiences as a coach.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I'll give him his fair shake. Like I said last week, I'll reiterate that. I'll give him his fair chance, see how he does. But obviously, when you see coaches like Hernan Crespo, former Argentine great striker, lead Defensa y Justicia to their first international trophy this week, kind of, at least to me, you see coaches maybe that are out there that are maybe a little more proven at a similar age. But the last quote,
could Beckham trust Hernan Crespo to come in and do exactly what he wants in terms of his vision and have that? I know it's a romantic journalistic story, whatever, but their close relationship I think is key, because don't discount Beckham's role in all this as well. The guy's been
this will reflect on Beckham
of the last 20 years. So
absolutely, however this goes, whether it's for better or for worse, will reflect on Beckham and his decision making. So we'll see how it plays out. And David Beckham is a very successful brand. He's hit the mark more often than he's missed. So, if David Beckham's brand is anything to go by, or his career is anything to go by, then this should be a good hire. This should prove to be a good hire, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's touch on this final quote before we close out this segment, and it's Phil Neville talking on the academy players and the overall player pool that Inter Miami is interested in tapping in. He touches on the star players, but obviously, and this was a recurring theme not only from him, but throughout the press conferences from all four subjects, they want to tap into more of the academy and more of the youth players.
I think there's two types of players that we want. We want the international star. We live in a world where football is universal. We're going to be on every single telly worldwide. So we need an international player that can relate to every household in the world. But ultimately, I think that young homegrown player is absolutely essential to this football club. Someone that we can put on that field that has the heart of an Inter Miami player, and I think that is the biggest challenge over the next 12 months. And I've got to say, with the backing of the ownership and the work that me and Chris are going to do, that is my goal this year, is to put somebody on that field that's got Inter Miami blood.
Steve, what do you make of that?
Yeah, they've got the international star, haven't they? They've got Higuain, Matuidi as well. But we know that they needed a top player from Europe or South America or whatever, just a superstar that can just get eyeballs onto the team. So they've done that. Now, obviously, they want to try and produce young players, but he's talking about someone we can put on the field that has the heart of an Inter Miami player. That's a player coming through the ranks right now, the 14, 15, 16-year-old. Can they start and identify these talents and then kick them on into the first team? He said that's the big challenge over the next 12 months. That's the challenge over the next 2 years, to see how they can do it. How many of those players can come through? Just like, here we go, eye rolling again, back to 1992, class of 92. Beckham, Scholes, Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, all those guys came into the United first team. Famously, Alex Ferguson said you can't win anything with kids. And then, of course, they went on this amazing run with those players in integral parts. So that's what they want to achieve. It's very, very difficult to do. That was a once-in-a-lifetime group of players that came through. But he knows, and certainly Chris Henderson knows, that, having been in Florida before when he was a minor fusion, but he knows that this catchment area should produce a lot of good quality players. And they have to find them and develop them in the right way and set up the framework within the squad, within the club, and have that scouting network and whatever else goes on the inside, and the coaches at the club to make sure these young kids progress so they can play with the likes of Higuain. Look, 2-3 years time, Steve Beckham's here, Messi, Ronaldo, those sort of players, that ilk, that caliber of player is always going to be mentioned. But we have to. It's exciting to see the young players come through. Exactly. I'll never forget the moment when Phil Neville broke through into the first team. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment for us all,
Steve, if I see you with a Manchester United jersey at the first game back at Inter Miami CF Stadium this upcoming season, I am full-blown slide tackling you.
I'll have Cantona 7 on the back.
Scissor kick style. No, look.
Cantona, yeah.
Look, I think this is an overarching theme from all parties, and I think that they want to really tap into that because South Florida has been spoken about as a market an area in the United States that has a lot of talent, but it's been untapped for a long time. And I think the idea is that you can groom these talents into being professional players, and you can fill up a pretty good MLS squad with enough domestic players that can, not only make the local fan base really proud of what's being done and what's being worked on and the work that's happening at the club, but also that can help you be a successful team. Obviously, you have to add some pieces to that in MLS, and maybe that's where the international stars down the road come in, whoever it is at that point, like it is right now with Gonzalo Higuain and Blaise Matuidi. But I think that they're really going to stress and emphasize these homegrowns and these academy players and the youth. Also because of the fact that it's a cheaper way to build a team than having to go spend, X million amount to go sign a veteran player that's at the end of his career. So I think that's part of the process. I think, MLS has evolved, whereas a few years ago, they were signing older veterans. Now the focus is starting to change a little bit more and say we need to start building from within and creating our own players so we can not only build successful teams, but also have players that we can sell on and start making money off of transfer fees that can either come back into the club. And it's a more healthy and successful way to run a team. So I think that's more along the lines of why they're really trying to focus on this and emphasize this, because it's a better financial model maybe for MLS teams than it is maybe for other teams across the world that can splash the cash. We'll stop it there because we've been going at it for a bit. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come back to talk about the recent MLS draft and Inter Miami's picks in that draft, as well as a couple more things. All right, Steve. So another big talking point last week was the MLS Super Draft. I just refer to it as the MLS Draft because it's not very super in my opinion. It's gotten less and less super over the years since I started covering it. When it used to be a lot of rounds, now it's down to 3. That's a product of different homegrown players and the homegrown rights and all things of that nature. So let's just quickly go over who Inter Miami drafted and what we think about the picks. So with their 10th overall pick, their Inter Miami's first pick in the first round, they went with Indiana forward Josh Penn. Then later in the first round, with the 26th overall pick, they went with University of Kentucky center back Aime Mabika. And then in the second round, the 10th pick in the second round, 37th overall, they got Oregon State left back Joe Hafferty. Now, obviously, let's start with Josh Penn, Indiana forward, played for Indy 11, spent a bit of time with Indy 11 in 2020. For me, a lot of people were confused why they went forward when they had a need at the back. Obviously, at that point, Mabika hadn't been drafted. So, for me, and I put this out on Twitter, is I think he's cover essentially for Lewis Morgan. Because Lewis Morgan started every game last year on the right wing. And I know he saw some time on the left wing, but he was the go-to guy on the right wing. And he didn't really have a backup. Didn't really have someone to fill in for him. Obviously, he was subbed out of games, but if he had gone down injured, I think Inter Miami would have been in a real bind because there just wasn't anyone else that could give you anything close to what he could. And I'm not saying Josh Penn is going to give you something close to Lewis Morgan in terms of production, but I think he can fill in at that spot if something happens. Because this year, it should be more of a regular season in terms of the amount of games. So, can you count on Lewis Morgan to start every single game over the course of a regular season or a regular season? And also, if he continues with this fine form and Scotland calls him up for friendlies or games that are on their schedule for this year, you're going to need someone to step in and take that role or fill that role. So I think that's what Inter Miami's thought process is here. I don't think he's a striker. I don't think they're looking at him as a number 9. But, what do you think about him as a potential backup for Lewis Morgan there on the right? Yeah,
I mean, his resume sounds pretty good. 5 appearances, two starts before joining Indiana. This is where Chris Henderson and his experience and his know-how of the leagues and the USL and the college system and everything. These are his picks, aren't they? He's powered this. He's identified these guys. So, it's on him. But again, the young players, aren't they, coming through? So you just don't know. But there's a chance that one of them could really come off, especially under different coaching maybe and just the way he's guided. So yeah, these are all backup players, but if they can get some minutes off the bench and then start to impress, who was coming on and really sort of changing the game or making doing something different? It was such a mixed bag, wasn't it? It was so little sort of depth in the squad. So we'll have to wait and see.
Now Inter Miami's second pick ended up being their last pick because the third pick that they had, Oregon State left back Joe Hafferty, was traded after the draft to the Seattle Sounders for a second round selection in 2022. So they've essentially traded their second round pick in 2021 for the Seattle Sounders draft pick, second round draft pick in 2022. But just quickly to touch on Aimé Mabika, a 6'6" center back, large player, a lot of size, imposing in that regard. Supposedly not the most technical player, but he could be groomed into something fairly solid in MLS. I think that obviously they needed to address center back. They need some more bodies back there. They have Nicolas Figal and Leandro Gonzalez Pires. You could throw in Christian McCoon, who's kind of a center midfielder / center back. Not sure what his actual best position is, but I think Mabika will help give another depth option there, and we'll probably see some minutes in 2021. But I think that they're going to need to sign one more center back, someone to be the number 3 and potentially push either Figal, well, most likely Figal, but also Gonzalez Pires for a starting spot. Because I don't think you can go into the season with Mabika as your number 3. Because if Figal or Gonzalez Pires goes down, you're going to trust a rookie to help try to manage the waters. I think that'd be a tough ask.
He is young, he's big, he's athletic, he's strong. And they do need help in that way, don't they? Because they were just so short last year and so porous at times, especially from set plays, and just never were really that convincing. But again, like you say, he's a rookie player, but was it named Conference USA Player of the Year? So you never know. So it sounds like 2 intriguing picks when you sort of have a look at where they've been and what they've been doing and what people have been saying about them. I personally haven't seen them play, so I don't know. But from what we're reading here, it sounds like they've got potential, and that's why they've signed them. Again, Chris Henderson would have known about these players, so be interesting to see how they get on.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But I think Inter Miami addressed 2 positions or 2 areas that they needed to bolster. Obviously, still a lot of other areas that need to be addressed, potentially, with starting caliber players. And obviously that's a question that a lot of people have, and I think a lot of people asked, in the aftermath and even before the draft. And I think instead of doing a Q&A session, we can just address that now to help close out the show here. What positions is Inter Miami looking at to fortify and to make some additions in the coming weeks now that they have Chris Henderson and Phil Neville on board? So Jorge Mas was on Onside Radio after the press conferences on Friday, and he named some of the positions. He didn't name any names, but he said he named the positions that they're looking at. And he said left back, an attacking piece on the left side, a center midfielder, and center back reinforcement. So those are the 4 he named. I mean, I would imagine that there's probably another 1 or 2 spots maybe that they'll look at as well, because again, I think goalkeeper's a spot that they're gonna want to address. But what do you think? What do you think about those positions and just the overall approach? I'm actually surprised that, and maybe he omitted this because he was just answering it in the thick of a conversation or an interview, but I'm surprised that he didn't say right back. And maybe they do go after a right back this offseason, but I don't know if they see Dylan Nealis as a potential starter in year 2, if they think Nicolas Figal can be the guy there again. Overall, what did you think? What do you think about those positions being addressed?
Yeah, I mean, look, we know that in attacking wise, they need something else. Whether or not it's another number 9, sort of target man to maybe play with Higuain. We're not going to go back to whether or not Phil Neville plays 4-4-2 or not. We haven't got that far down the road yet. But what's going to happen with Pizarro? Is he going to stay, or can they try and get the best out of him? There needs definitely some more creativity in midfield for sure. Will Trapp's gone, so they definitely need like a holding midfield player, someone to sort of dovetail with Matuidi. I guess that player could be a bit more creative, I guess. But still, they just didn't create enough goals. Lewis Morgan wasn't really doing anything. There wasn't much else happening really. So more creativity, a different striking option off the bench. I think even if Higuain's not working, can they throw someone else on? Someone just to ruffle a few feathers, a Giroud or something like that. I don't know. I'm just putting names out of the hat, but. And then,
I don't think they're going to be able to get Giroud because they're at their 3DP spots right now, and I don't think based on everything they're saying they're going to go back out and splash a whole lot of cash, at least right now, on a big name DP.
But Matuidi wasn't a DP, was he? So that maybe Giroud in a couple of years, but I don't know, someone like that. I don't know, someone just to get a bit of excitement off the bench and just to change things up. But yeah, as you mentioned, both fullbacks. Ben Sweat's gone, hasn't he? So as well, so that there's a lot of places. We just talked about the centre back again. The more good centre backs they've got, the better, really.
The day that an MLS team has like a Gonzalo Higuain type caliber player starting up top, and then they have another caliber player of Olivier Giroud on the bench, that is the day MLS has not only won CONCACAF Champions League, they are competing for deeper runs at the Club World Cup, because that's a luxury to have, my friend.
I know. Okay, all right. Maybe give you a couple of 37-year-old Oliver Giroud or something like that, but Olivier Giroud, sorry.
I think he'd still want to start somewhere else. He could start somewhere else in MLS.
Someone with a bit about them, someone with experience that can come on and change the game if they need to. If they're 1 down with 20 minutes to go, what can he do on the bench? How can he change it up? And unfortunately, sending on, bless him. Again, we talk about rookies like someone like Robbie Robinson. He looks like he had potential. He's just too raw, and maybe Penn's Josh Penn is going to be too raw, and maybe Mabika would be too raw as well. We don't know, but that's the job of the coaching staff to get them ready. But a bit of experience and know-how of things to come off the bench and change things, or be a starter. That's what they need.
It is MLS though, so you can't address everything. I think Julian Carranza could be the number 2 striker option this season. They obviously invested money in him, so maybe they see him as the number 2 going into his second season. I agree with you that they could add one more piece up top, maybe a more experienced player than Carranza and Robbie Robinson, just to have that tool in the tool bag. But I don't think it's going to be a player that's obviously at a very high level, because they have a lot of other positions that they need to address. You said, curiously enough or interestingly enough, you said that they need some more creativity in the midfield. I agree with that to an extent. I do, but I think in terms of, if we're talking about that first line of the midfield, I think that they need more of a number 6, a little bit more of a pit bull terrier that can go in there and win some battles and win some balls, and that'll help maybe free up Blaise Matuidi to play a little bit more advanced. Not that Blaise Matuidi is going to be pulling the strings, but I think that they need a number 6.
That was Will Trapp, wasn't it? I thought he was a pretty tidy player.
Sure, but Will Trapp's known for his technical abilities and his ability to ping a pass. He's not the most athletic player, not the most fierce player, isn't necessarily known for his crunching tackles and his fiery personality, which is what I think Inter Miami could use just to bring that bite into the midfield a little bit more. But Matuidi brought some of it with some smarts and with some experience and with some technical skills, but I think they could use a workhorse in there, just a dogged midfielder that's going to go in there and bite some ankles, for lack of a better phrase. Steve, we'll leave it there. Obviously we'll get your final thought here before we close out. So Steve, if it's anything to do with Manchester United, I'm going over to your place right now and slide tackling you.
Don't worry, I'll send you. There actually was a Class of '92 documentary about Phil.
Oh, were you the co-producer of that? I would imagine so.
Yeah. It's actually good. So you should watch that. Learn up your football history, and then you'll understand once you watch that. But look, I just think bottom line is they had to make a change. It wasn't, for whatever reason, stuff wasn't working on and off the pitch. They've made a change. I did think it was interesting that Beckham, who we haven't really spoken to much, in the last even like 6 years since been covering the thing, he appears now and then, never really spoken too much about football. And this was the first time I thought when he was basically saying, I'm hands on, I want to be in there. He's been in the training ground every day. He's been getting to know everyone, which was he wanted to do initially, but because of COVID he couldn't. So the dynamic, I think, has just slightly changed, and I think that makes it exciting. And I think for the fans, should be looking at it thinking it's a fresh start. They've had the experiences of last year, and now I think the next few weeks are going to be interesting to see what they do transfer wise and how they're going to try and get different players in. So that's going to be really interesting. And Chris Henderson is supposedly this guru, this guy that's going to sort of pull all the strings and get the right players in. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get on. And then when Phil comes back and then gets to work on the training ground as well, are we going to see a difference in the way they set up? So that's it. Are we actually going to see a season start? We don't really know yet right now, but hopefully, all being well, they'll start getting together within the next sort of few weeks, and then the season will be upon us.
My final thought is that we touched on the four men that were up there on the press conferences on Friday, but we touched on Chris Henderson the least. His role from here until when the season starts will be vitally important, and he's gonna. You don't be surprised if you see him bring in some decent to good MLS players, as well as maybe a couple of foreign signings that have probably already been in the works somewhat, because the team and the squad has to be rounded out. It's obviously still missing a few pieces, so that's his work to be done. That's the next piece of the puzzle, or the next part of the process. So Chris Henderson's job will be on full display over the next few weeks, but I expect that he'll probably make some very good additions. And harping back to what we said earlier about the youth and the academy structure and the desire for the team to want to promote someone from within the club already, don't be surprised if you see Ian Frey sign a contract with the first team in the coming days or weeks. But that about does it for now on Miami Total Futbol Radio. Again, don't forget to follow our social media channels, as well as leave us a review on Apple Podcast. On behalf of Steve Brenner, aka David Beckham's long lost cousin, aka the biggest Manchester United fan on this podcast, I'm Franco Panizo, and we'll talk to you guys again next week.